The night before it all snapped, I stood in the kitchen in one sock and a t-shirt, listening to the building breathe. The South Loop has its own pulse, elevated trains shuttering the windows, grit on the sill, the lake wind sneaking in through the stubborn spot in the frame. I had just pulled a sheet pan of roasted carrots and onions from the oven and was waiting for the edges to caramelize when the knob turned and the door swung wide. Tyler came in first, chin up, eyes bright like a kid pushing a dare. Behind him, dragging a wheeled suitcase and a box with the word fragile scrawled in marker, was his ex. "This is just for a little while," he said, like he was explaining the weather. "Brooks between places. I wish I could tell you I answered like lightning, that I said all the clever things I would later think of in the shower. But I stood there with the oven heat washing my knees, my sock sticking to the tile where I'd spilled a little olive oil, thinking it was a joke until the suitcase thunked and the box tore, and I saw the corner of a picture frame with Tyler and Brooke on some beach, sun-dazed and teenage. Just for a little while." His mouth made a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Be cool." It should have been a fight that shook the walls. Instead, it was a quiet, thin thing that fell between us and slid under the couch. I nodded, because that's what you do when your stomach drops in a public place. You nod and swallow and your ears buzz. I turned back to the oven and closed it with more force than I meant. Here's what I promised myself in that hot, humming minute, with the sound of their whispered logistics behind me. I would not be the girl who waits her turn in her own home. And I would not set myself on fire to keep anybody warm ever again. I didn't know the shape of that promise yet. I just knew it was coming. Tyler used to laugh that I made a home out of anything. It wasn't a joke to me. I'm a nurse, the kind of person who knows which drawer the gauze is in, who labels the spice jars so you never mistake cumin for cinnamon. When we met, it was at a street fair in Wicker Park. He was selling hand-pulled prints with bold, bright blocks of color and crooked margins, talking big about a print shop in a loft he'd found, wide windows, concrete floors, the whole artisanal dream. He had paint on his knuckle and a dimple that made it easy to believe him. I believed him through the weeks we counted out tip money on my coffee table, through the deposit I put down, because his credit was a mess from a lease he walked away from, through the way I rolled my eyes and signed the lease in my name, because that's what women in love do when the world is slippery and the people they love say they're trying. I remember the day we moved in. The apartment was a long rectangle, bright in the morning, dark in the evening, and loud all the time. I hung a framed map of Chicago over the couch because we both loved the way the river cuts the city like a looped ribbon. I planted a pothos in a thrifted ceramic pot and set it on the bookshelf. We found a tiny cafe that made egg sandwiches so good you forgave the wait, and we carried ours home, still warm, to eat cross-legged on the floor because our couch was coming later. We took turns holding the sandwich up to each other's mouths, bites too big, greased napkins, laughing. Tyler said, "This is it, Maya. Start her home before the home." I made that apartment smell like roasting tomatoes and sugar cookies. I kept the good towels on the second shelf and hid the stained one at the back where nobody but me would find it. I left my hospital shoes by the door in a neat stack, and I tucked $20 in the freezer behind the peas because my mother always did that, and I like the way it feels to know you can find something in a pinch. When we hit snags, his hours cut at the shop he picked up to keep afloat. My shifts doubled when the unit got slammed. I did the mental math and told us it would be fine. When Tyler's brother needed a place to crash for a few nights, I inflated an air mattress and made pancakes in the morning like someone's favorite aunt. When his car died, I drove him to interviews with the seat heater on, my hand in his during the red lights. I deferred a vacation I'd been saving for and put that money toward catching us up. I told myself, this is what partnership looks like, a series of small, patient reinforcements. I told myself that standing next to someone during the hard parts is what makes you deserve the soft parts later. Then Brooke rolled her suitcase in. The next days multiplied like dull pennies. I would find my favorite sweater draped over the back of a chair, damp from a walk in the drizzle, with Brooke's perfume threaded through it. My coffee mug, the one with the city skyline, showed up on the bathroom counter with a smear of lipstick I didn't wear. Condiments I hadn't bought appeared on the fridge door. Tyler invented a new word, chill, as in, chill babe, don't make this weird. Brooke was polite in the way people are when they plan to be somewhere a while. She stacked her shoes neatly by the door and brought a basil plant and placed it on the sill like an apology. She said thank you when I passed her the corkscrew. She invited friends over for wine on a Thursday and said, "Oh, did we forget to tell you?" when I came out in a robe and found a cluster of strangers on the couch I'd paid for. Legs tucked under them like cats, their laughter already acquainted with the echoes of our hallway. I started sleeping with earplugs, the yellow foam kind I wear at the hospital when a patient's roommate snores like a motorcycle. Tyler would come to bed late and smell like other rooms. If I turned toward him, his back would be there. In the mornings, if I woke before them, I would stand in the dark kitchen and listen to the radiator hiss. And for a handful of heartbeats, I could pretend it was still our place, just ours. The 2 bowls in the dish rack and the glass with the al dente pasta watermark. Then footsteps, her laugh, his word, chill. I could list the small humiliations like a rosary. The time my name was erased from the whiteboard where I kept track of whose turn it was to take out the trash, replaced with B's night, in Brooke's looping handwriting. The way Tyler would take calls with me in the room and lower his voice only when it was sweet. The day he opened the window wide on a cold afternoon because Brooke liked fresh air, and I watched the basil plant survive while my pathos dropped a leaf into silence. At work, people said, "You okay?" I said, "Fine," like a reflex. I started staying late because sterile fluorescence felt less hostile than the cheap lamp glow from my living room. Patients needed me, and need is a clear thing. Home was a mystery, and I wanted certainty. I found the turning point in the laundry room. Our building had a basement with machines that rattled hard enough to walk across the concrete if you didn't wedge a folded flyer under 1 foot. The place smelled like warm lint and damp wool. There was always 1 sock abandoned on top of a washer, its mate lost to wherever socks disappear to. Mrs. Alvarez, the building manager, taped notes to the bulletin board about parking permits and painter's tape colors, and the rule about not leaving detergent on the machines. I was down there on a Sunday with a basket that bruised my hip, feeding quarters into a hungry slot, when Mrs. Alvarez pushed the door open with her elbow, carrying a box of light bulbs and a binder, reading as she walked. "You're Maya," she said, squinting at me over her glasses. "Guilty." She laughed, relieved to find a joke. "I got your email about the drip in the bathroom. Maintenance will be up Monday." She has the kind of voice that lives at the right volume. You want to stand near it. We chatted. She said the building was being inspected the next month. She said the owners were weird about unauthorized occupants because of insurance. She said the 3 words that fit together like puzzle pieces. You can transfer. Say that again? The lease, she said, flipping through the binder, tapping a page with nails painted the color of cherries. We allow lease assignments. If occupants qualify, we can assign or add and remove without breaking the lease. Saves people penalties. Keeps us covered. That's a thing? I asked, heartbeat in my teeth. It's absolutely a thing, she said, unfazed by the way my air suddenly felt new. People's lives change. We adjust. I folded a towel that had been with me since college and felt the old cotton under my thumbs. Lives change. We adjust. That afternoon, Brooke left her work badge on the counter, and I saw without trying not to see where she worked. A bank I had seen ads for on bus stops. I thought about the basil, the way she watered it in small circles. Thought about Tyler's assurance that this was temporary, and about the way the word temporary can stretch until it's a trap. I Googled lease assignment on my phone like I was reading about a foreign word, tasting syllables. I could do it. I could move the responsibility that had been welded to my name, not to punish them, but to set my future free. He brought his ex to live with us. I transferred the lease. Lease transferred. People always imagine revenge as something loud, plates breaking and tires squealing. Mine made hardly a sound. It started with kindness. I made chili the way Tyler liked, with a fat pinch of cocoa powder, served with cornbread still warm, like an offering. Over dinner, I mentioned easy as a stretch that Mrs. Alvarez said we should have everyone on the paperwork because of inspections and codes. It protects us, I said. If anything happens, we're all covered. Brooke's eyes flicked to Tyler, weighing his face, and he gave her the smile he used to sell prints. Reassurance without substance. Makes sense, she said, careful, as if testing a thin patch of ice. I'll set it up, I said, like an assistant in a movie. We'll swing by, sign whatever, adult stuff. We did it 2 days later under fluorescent lights in the management office that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and toner. Mrs. Alvarez slid papers in a neat stack. She spoke with her voice that made you feel steadied. She explained what each line meant. She made copies. She handed us pens with lids that snapped. I signed the form that removed me from the lease, my name unhooking clean as a clasp. Tyler signed where it said tenant. Brooke signed where it said tenant. Their signatures sloped toward each other on the page, swoops and lines, a private alphabet. Mrs. Alvarez slid the final copy into a folder with a paper tab and wrote our names. No, not ours. Their names, across it in block letters. Congratulations, she said, not unkind. And I tucked my copy into my bag, heart beating like a fist knocking from inside a chest. My utilities were easier. A handful of phone calls, a couple of hold music symphonies, and then the power bill would come to someone else's inbox. The internet. The streaming accounts I'd been paying for because Tyler's card kept mysteriously getting compromised and canceled and reissued. I switched my mailing address to my friend Lila's place, where a sunroom overlooks an alley with a trash can lid that never sits right and a cat that patrols like a sheriff. Lila handed me a spare key without asking questions, because good friends keep the kinds of silences that hold. I siphoned my life out of the apartment like a patient taking steady breaths through a straw, slow and even and invisible if you weren't watching. My clothes disappeared, shirts by shirts, until the closet looked less like me and more like a closet a couple had agreed to share. The drawer with my pajama pants went sparser, and I filled it with folded towels so the absence wouldn't catch a careless eye. My books, which had made a tiled mural of spines along the shelf, were reduced to a neat row with nothing to say. I left the map of Chicago. I left the pothos, which had started to perk up ever since someone moved the basil to another window, greedy for the sun. The night before I moved the last box, there was a small gathering in our living room for Brooke's birthday. How old? Old enough to know better is not a number, and it's the only one that matters. There were candles on a bakery cake, wax drips kissed into frosting, dots of blue sugar. Tyler kept one hand on the small of Brooke's back as if she might float away, and he was anchoring her. They laughed the same laugh, the one I used to mirror in other apartments, in other rooms. A friend of Brooke's, dark hair, red lipstick, an expression like she was evaluating a car she wasn't sure she wanted yet, looked at me after we sang and said, "So, are you their roommate?" My mouth did what mouths do before brains catch up. It told the truth. "Not anymore," I said, and I put a slice of cake on a paper plate and passed it to Tyler, whose eyes did a quick flick to mine, a warning he didn't have the vocabulary for. I smiled back, and must have done it well enough that he saw only teeth. After people had left and the apartment was a wreck of paper cups and confetti and 2 forgotten jackets draped over chair backs like sleeping dogs, I said I had an early shift and kissed Tyler on the cheek. He felt like a warm statue, like something made for display. I took my bag, which was heavier than it had been that morning, but not suspiciously so, and I walked to Lila's with the city wrapped around me like a coat. If this were a movie, you'd see a montage. Tyler turning on the TV and finding the streaming login won't go through. Brooke running a card at the supermarket and having to resend payment to the utility company when a bill bounces back. The 2 of them sitting at our, not my, kitchen table with mail addressed to them in a tidy pile. Words like due and notice printed in unromantic fonts. You'd see them buzz the intercom for Mrs. Alvarez and ask whether the rent amount had changed with the assignment, and Mrs. Alvarez would push her glasses up and say that the building's annual adjustment took effect with new agreements, because that's how it always works. You'd see a construction crew on the sidewalk below, delivering sheets of drywall and rolled insulation for the unit next door, the dust sneaking under the door like a nosy neighbor. Life never cues the music the way films do. Karma is a softer machine than that. It hums. It tilts the floor. It lets you pour your coffee and then realize halfway to your lips that the taste has changed. Tyler texted me after a few days, a gentle fishing line. "Hey, where did you put the mustard?" I didn't answer. He tried again later. "Also, they changed the rent? We didn't talk about that. Can we talk?" When I didn't take either bait, he called. I let it ring out. He called again, and this time I answered because I am not a ghost, and he is not a caller ID. I waited. "You moved out?" he asked, as if the words were hula hoops he couldn't get spinning on his hips. "I transferred the lease," I said, the phrase light in my mouth because the heavy part had already passed. "I moved in with Lila." "You didn't say." "I said everything," I told him, not unkind. And in the long pause I could hear someone else in the background, Brooke or the TV or the construction next door. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between a person and a noise they make. "You can't just do that," he said, but the sentence wilted as he said it because we both knew I had, and there were signatures, plural, under the fact. He tried again, softer. "We were going through a rough patch. He thought if he said, 'Be cool,' that I would be. He thought that if he said temporary enough times, I would set up camp on the thin edge of something and call it home. He thought I owed him patience like a debt." "Tyler," I said, and I put the weight of his name in the space where we used to put sugar in coffee. "You brought another woman to live in my house. You erased me in front of me. I offered you adult paperwork to protect us. You signed it. That is not a rough patch. That is a choice." He didn't say anything for a while. When he did, his voice was the one I recognized from nights I had held him while he told me about his father's temper and the way he learned to tell jokes to keep rooms from breaking. "Can you forgive me?" he asked. And there it was, naked. Not a trick, not a chill. A question that has only two answers. "I can," I said, "because forgiveness is something I give for me, not for the person who asks. But I'm not coming back." There was a scraping sound, a chair moving, a hand over a speaker, and then Brooke's voice, careful and trying not to shake. "Maya, I didn't know he told you it was temporary," she said. "He said..." She stopped, picked a different path. "I'm sorry." I believe that she was sorry in the way women get caught on hooks men bait without even knowing where they got the bait. I believed she had unpacked her suitcase and told herself she was making do, and that she had traced the outline of my life with her fingertip and thought it was almost a match, and that almost is a dangerous word. "I hope you like the basil," I said, "because you can be kind even when kindness has no audience, and because I am tired of the idea that revenge has to salt the earth. Water it in small circles." After we hung up, Lila put a bowl of pasta in my hands. No questions, and we ate on her futon with our feet tucked under us. Outside, a siren passed, and the cat in the alley jumped. I went to bed and slept a sleep so clean it felt like I'd been underwater all winter, and finally breached. Tyler tried a few more times in the days that followed, messages that sounded like the old him and the new him, sometimes in a single line. Brooke sent one note that was just, "I didn't know about the lease. If I had, I would have told you that you were brave." I answered that I wasn't brave, only tired of pretending courage was something loud and public. Sometimes courage is signing a piece of paper in a quiet office and choosing yourself. Mrs. Alvarez texted me a picture of a notice taped to the lobby wall. "Hallway painting scheduled. Temporary inconvenience. Thank you for your patience." "Good timing," she wrote. And I smiled into my phone like a teenager. There's a part of the story where someone expects disaster to strike the villains. It didn't. Not exactly. The rent went up the way it always does. The internet company insisted on a fee for something that sounded invented, and probably was. The construction next door made their mornings brighter with a drill that liked to sing before most people stretched. They adopted a dog from a shelter, because starting over often looks like a new thing that needs you back. and the dog ate the basil down to a stub. That's the thing about karma. It doesn't need to break bones to do its work. It hands you the weight of your choices and watches to see if you can carry them. I ran into Tyler and Brooke once more, a few weeks later, outside the corner store where we used to buy seltzer and gummy bears when we craved sugar that felt like a joke. I had a paper bag with a loaf of bread and a bunch of tulips whose petals were already loose at the tips. He looked thinner and older, in the way people do when they've been worrying about things that can't be fixed with a flare of charm. She held the leash of a medium-sized mutt with one ear up and one ear down, and eyes like somebody's aunt. The dog sat the way good dogs do when they think they are supposed to impress company. "We miss you," he blurted, and then flinched like the words burned coming out. The dog wagged its tail, uninterested in human drama. "How's the shop?" I asked, because civility is a muscle worth keeping limber. "Slow," he said, "but I'm getting there." "We're making it work," Brooke added, and there was a tiny triumphant lift at the end of the sentence that told me she needed to hear herself say it out loud. "I hope you do," I said and meant it, and watched the way Tyler's eyes did a complicated thing like gratitude with regret braided through it. He took a breath. "I'm sorry," he said, plain. Not for effect, not for show. A sentence like a clean plate. For all of it. For the way I made you feel small in your own house, for making you carry what was mine. "I forgive you," I said, and felt the truth land, satisfied and finished. "Take care of the dog." He laughed, surprised, and Brooke smiled, and the world didn't tilt or break or send a sign. We nodded at one another, earthlings sharing a sidewalk, and went our separate ways. The tulips shed a petal in the bag, and I thought about how beauty is messy and temporary and still worth carrying home. At Lila's, I arranged the flowers in a chipped glass jar and put them on the windowsill where the afternoon light makes even dust look elegant. I called my mother and told her I'd done something scary, and that it had felt like taking off a heavy coat. She said she was proud of me and told me a story about my grandmother that I'd never heard. About how she had once left a farmhouse with nothing but a suitcase and an address in her pocket and had made a life on the other side of a state line. We tell these stories because sometimes we need to borrow the bravery of the people who came before us. I wrote down the part about the address in the Notes app on my phone. I like to hold on to a sentence when it clinks right. My new place came a little later, a studio up a flight of stairs that complain every time you use them, with a window that looks at a maple tree that shivers in the slightest wind. The floors are uneven, and if you set a pen on the table, it will roll until it rests against the salt shaker, like it knows where it wants to be. I have space for a tiny kitchen table and a dog-eared copy of a book I read when I was a kid. I bought a pothos of my own and promised it out loud that I'd find the right light. Sometimes I remember the apartment with the map of the city, and the couch that sagged in the center, and the basil that shot up fast, and the pothos that took its sweet time, and the night the door opened, and he rolled his past into our future without asking. I remember the feel of the pen sliding across the page and my name releasing its hold, not as a surrender, but as an act of faith in the person I keep being, the Maya who says yes to herself. People ask me, because people love a moral stitch to a story, what I learned. I tell them it's simple and it's hard and it tastes like black coffee. Love is not a lease that you sign and never read. Home is not a prize you win by being the most forgiving. You are allowed to leave the table when respect is not being served. You are allowed to pick up your keys and your plants and your copy of yourself and step into a hallway that may be loud and imperfect, and you are allowed to find another door. And when the person who hurt you asks if they can be forgiven, you are allowed to say yes with a wall behind it. You can bless them and send them back to the work they have to do, the bills that have their names on them now, the basil that may or may not survive a dog with a reckless heart. You can find yourself in a room that smells like your soap and your shampoo and your dinner and your soft, tired brave. And you can sit cross-legged on your floor and eat something you made just for you. And you can call that dinner, and you can call that justice, and you can call that home. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about the story in the comments. See you in the next one.